What if the man who built a career on telling unforgettable stories became the center of the darkest story Hollywood had ever whispered about? Introduction: the phone call that changed everything. It was the kind of phone call no parent, no child, no human being ever expects to receive. 3 words. Flat. Clinical. Final. They're both gone. In the early hours of a quiet Sunday morning, emergency vehicles flooded an upscale Los Angeles neighborhood, where privacy is currency and secrets are part of the architecture. Behind tall hedges and iron gates sat the home of legendary filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. By nightfall, the house was sealed. By morning, the headlines exploded. And within days, a single name dominated every conversation. Nick, his son. The same son who would later say, through tears, rage, and numb disbelief, "I ended his life because he removed me from his will." But what really happened inside that mansion during Rob Reiner's final days? Was this a crime of greed? A lifetime of resentment boiling over? Or something far more complicated and far more human than anyone wants to admit? This isn't just a story about death. It's a story about legacy, entitlement, silence, and the dangerous lies families tell themselves until it's too late. And once you hear how it unfolded, you'll never look at successful families the same way again. The man everyone thought they knew. Rob Reiner was a symbol of stability in a chaotic industry. Decades of success, beloved films, a familiar face that felt safe, reassuring, almost comforting. He was the kind of man people assumed had everything figured out. And that assumption may have been his greatest shield. Friends described him as opinionated but warm, principled but stubborn, larger than life, but deeply private at home. What few people ever saw was the growing tension beneath the surface. Because while Rob's public legacy was secure, his private world was quietly unraveling. And at the center of that unraveling was his son, Nick Reiner, the heir who never inherited peace. Nick grew up surrounded by success, but starving for approval. Imagine being born into a household where excellence isn't celebrated, it's expected. Where your father's achievements cast a shadow so large, it blocks out your own sense of worth. Nick tried everything: writing, producing, reinventing himself. But no matter how hard he worked, he was always introduced the same way. "This is Rob Reiner's son." That label followed him everywhere. And according to those close to the family, the relationship between father and son slowly shifted from strained to silent, to something dangerously unresolved. Because silence isn't peace. It's pressure. And pressure always looks for a way out. The will, a piece of paper that changed everything. It wasn't the money. Not really. It was what the will symbolized. According to this fictional dramatization, Rob had made a decision late in life. One he believed was moral, principled, even noble. He chose to redirect most of his estate toward charitable causes and legacy projects. Film preservation, education, social initiatives. Nick, however, saw something else. Rejection, finality, a message written in legal ink that said, "You were never enough." For many families, wills don't cause conflict until after death. In this story, the conflict began while everyone was still alive. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The final days, when conversations turned into confrontations. The last weeks inside the Reiner home were reportedly tense. Short tempers, long silences. Doors closed a little harder than necessary. Nick visited more often. Arguments became circular, repeating the same pain without resolution. Have you ever been in a conversation where no one is listening anymore? Where every sentence is just ammunition? That's where this family was headed. Michelle, caught between husband and son, tried to keep the peace. But peacekeeping only works when both sides still want peace. And one night, everything tipped. The confession that shattered the story. "I ended his life." Those words, whether spoken in anger, guilt, or despair, carry a weight that never lifts. In this fictional narrative, Nick's confession wasn't delivered with triumph or malice. It was fragmented, emotional, contradictory. At times he blamed greed. At others, abandonment. Sometimes he blamed himself. Sometimes he blamed his father. Which version was true? That's the uncomfortable part. Sometimes more than one thing can be true at once. When grief collides with rage, Here's what most crime stories miss. People don't snap out of nowhere. They fracture slowly. Years of unspoken resentment don't disappear just because someone smiles at a premiere. Unresolved childhood wounds don't vanish with age. If there's an aha moment here, it's this. Unchecked emotional debt compounds, just like financial debt. And eventually, it demands payment. The house afterward, silence, shock, and questions. The home that once hosted dinners, laughter, and holiday traditions became a place frozen in time. Police tape flapped in the wind. Neighbors whispered. Fans mourned the man they thought they knew. And Nick? He sat alone with the unbearable weight of consequence. Because even if rage feels justified in the moment, it never protects you from what comes after. The bigger conversation no one wants to have. This story isn't really about celebrity. It's about family dynamics we recognize but rarely confront. Parents who believe providing is the same as nurturing. Children who confuse inheritance with love. Conversations delayed until they become impossible. How many families are one unresolved argument away from permanent damage? How many people are waiting for apologies that may never come? Lessons hidden inside the tragedy. If there's anything this fictional dramatization teaches us, it's this. Talk while you still can. Say the uncomfortable things early. Don't let silence become your family's language. Money doesn't heal emotional wounds. Success doesn't replace validation. And love, real love, requires presence, not just provision. Why stories like this captivate us? True crime-style stories grip us because they reflect fears we don't like to name. What if I never resolve this? What if it ends badly? What if silence costs more than confrontation? We watch not because we're morbid, but because we're human. Final reflection. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you leave unsaid. In this fictional account, Rob Reiner's legacy wasn't undone by his films, his politics, or his fame. It was undone by what never got said between a father and a son. And that's something no one can fix. Call to action. Let's talk about the hard things. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, don't ignore that feeling. Share this article. Talk to someone you've been avoiding. Start the conversation before it becomes a regret. And if you have thoughts, questions, or a perspective of your own, drop them in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones we watch. They're the ones we finally choose to change.